if somebody is seeing you and I did wear, in dim visibility and so forth, I did carry a high-vis jacket that I put on over the top of my leathers. In bright summer days and so forth, I didn't. But there are lights at the front of every motorcycle that you cannot switch off. There are lights beaming down forward in front of everybody to see what's going on in any reasonable motorcycle that you ride. I mean, anything from the 80s forward, the lights are on and you just turn them on.
Can I ask you something really quickly?
Sure.
It is one of his essential points, because I won't have time to talk about them, Clive Matthew Wilson's essential points, that reaction times slow in middle age, our ability to control a large moving object diminishes substantially. He is saying that. Do you agree with that?
No. I agree that there is a period at which, maybe at around, if I'm approaching 80, I'm going to be a bit slower and useless. But, I mean, we have people who drive cars all the time. The thing about a motorcyclist is he knows his limitations, and especially an old motorcyclist who's been around a long time, they know how to ride, and they know how to look after their bike, and they look after themselves. We're not talking about, I mean, the stat he's talking about is a young guy who's done relatively well, youngish compared to me, who's done relatively well, has bought a motorcycle and is overpowered. And those sorts of things do occur. And there could be some retesting done for people who re-enter the market after a certain period of time. But, I mean, I've been riding both off-road and on-road for, damn near 50 years, 48 of them anyway. So, I mean, the skill level goes up and the ability goes up. It's only when you'll always be overpowered. There are guys that go out there and buy cars that are vastly overpowered as well and do something incredibly stupid in them. You don't then suddenly legislate against the whole organisation because a few munters write their car off going on a roundabout onto the entrance at Westfield.
Eloquently put, as always, Peter Elliott. Peter Elliott. Grateful to talk to him.
Thanks, guys.
Goodbye. Speaking of handrails on mountains, before we go, you may have seen this story in media today. It's had a lot of attention because a woman named Annika Bading was shooting herself on a GoPro in a pool underneath a waterfall when a man behind her slipped into the pool and drowned, and water pressure seems to have swept him under and kept him under a rock ledge at the base of the Mackenzie Falls in Victoria. It's not the first fatality there. And the short version of the sad story is that Annika Bading is angry that there is no phone reception at the falls, although you'd think the emergency response wouldn't have helped much. She says warning signs about, by the time it got there, warning signs about the dangers of swimming are inadequate, she says. So we had a look online today. There are signs saying not to swim, which apparently are generally ignored. There are warnings online as well. The question really is, to what extent do you think we should be looked after in the great outdoors on these sorts of occasions?
You've left room for only one reply.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean it to be rhetorical.
It's a very good... Well, you made it very simple. You said, what difference would it have made to have phones there? And if they're ignoring warning signs against swimming, what more in the nature of signage is wanted?
I think TLC said it best when they sang "Don't Go Chasing Waterfalls," and if she'd just listened to that song, she would have known how to behave in that particular piece of natural environment.
Yes.
Maybe we need hawks to be able to drop messages from one spot to another rather than cell phone coverage everywhere we go.
If the birds are that smart, going back to that earlier topic, do we need the drones at all? Why can't we just...
I think this is my point, is if we just model that behaviour in front of the hawks, then we don't need drones at all.
Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister says mental health and addiction issues for all New Zealanders. Ron Patterson's going to head the just announced ministerial inquiry into mental health. We don't need to talk about it much because John Campbell's about to give you all the coverage you will need. Buying more Band-Aids was how I'd heard it described by a mental health worker this morning. Do you reckon I suppose we do need to make a lot of headway with this. Do you reckon we can in the mental health areas, just before we go?
Yes, I think we can. We have a conversation about mental health so much more than we did. There's a lot of practical stuff to be done, obviously, but I think about how much it's changed from when I was growing up, and I grew up next in a town that had a funny farm and where people had breakdowns and people committed suicide, and it was hushed and swept under the carpet. At least we're having the conversation now, and that's important for creating a caring community.
Are you sure that it's not having the conversation that's creating this apparent
I'm really sure it's not the conversation that's creating the boom in mental health.
I'm dubious.
That is going to be a difficult one to unpack in the next 12 seconds. But Stephen Franks, thank you very much for being on the panel today.
Good evening.
And Michelle Acourt, always lovely to have you on too. That's us. Thanks, everybody. Back tomorrow and Checkpoint shortly.
inquiry into mental health and addiction. The move to set up an inquiry is part of the Labour-led government's 100-day plan. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The Prime Minister says the government added addiction services to the review based on feedback during consultation. The 6-person panel will report back to the government by the end of October. Jacinda Ardern says she wants the inquiry to report back with a clear assessment of the current strengths and weaknesses of the community response to mental health and of the broader mental health system. She says nothing is off the table, as it's clear there's a problem with mental health in New Zealand and it's well past time for something to be done about it. Atu i te whare pārimata ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
The Christchurch City Council will consider temporarily chlorinating its water supply after engineering assessments of the city's wells revealed some of them may be susceptible to contamination. The latest assessments by engineers raised concerns that some of the city's 156 wells may not be sufficiently sealed to prevent surface groundwater contamination, particularly in heavy rainfall. But the council says there's no current issue with the quality of the city's groundwater and it is safe to drink. The Canterbury Medical Officer of Health, Alistair Humphrey, says the best option is to temporarily chlorinate the water, which the council will consider at a meeting on Thursday. The Waitangi Day organiser Peter Paraone says elders from all over Tai Tokerau are backing the plans for this year's welcome to the government. The formal porphyry's been moved from Te Ti Waitangi Marae after organisers lost patience with disruption there. Mr Paraone says the welcome will be held outside the carved meeting house on the treaty grounds, and elders have agreed the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern should speak from the veranda.
It certainly has been discussed and debated by the organising committee, and we don't envisage any untoward action in that regard.
Mr Paraone says there'll be no repeats of the 1998 incident where Te Te Whai Harawera prevented the then Labour leader Helen Clark from speaking in the whare at Te Ti. Water engineers at Auckland Council are investigating drains in Albany, including at a subdivision development, after localised flooding settled in 2 cul-de-sacs and flooded a house. The area had 52 millimetres of rain in an hour this morning. Laura Tupou reports.
For residents on Samuels Lane and Sucklings Lane, the clean-up continues. They say the water that reached waist-high came from a pipe belonging to a development on Samuels Lane. Watercare says stormwater is passing through a wastewater pipe laid by the developer and is reaching the soil. It says it's now capping the pipe to prevent further issues. But the developer's site manager, Simon Gibbs, says the development is not connected to the sewer system. The council is investigating drains in the area, including those at the site. Ko Laura Tupou aho.
A coroner says a snowboarding coach who committed suicide was let down by mental health services in central Otago. Coroner Anna Tutton says their failure to assess Benjamin Jolly was incomprehensible and inexcusable. Phil Pennington reports.
Mr Jolly, a 29-year-old company director of Wanaka and former half-pipe coach of the Spanish national team, died in April 2015. He was an alcoholic who'd suffered head injuries snowboarding and had other health problems, including depression. A few months before his death, he was strongly advised not to return to his overseas snowboarding commitments. Coroner Tutton says even though Mr Jolly's family, friends and police staff all asked mental health workers to assess him, he was not assessed. She's recommending the Southern District Health Board review its adult mental health processes and improve staff training. She says the DHB's response to the recommendations from its own inquiry into Mr Jolly's death has been patchy. This is Phil Pennington.
A spectacular thunderstorm in Napier and Hastings this afternoon brought torrential rain and violent winds. Gusts of up to 110 kilometres per hour were recorded at Napier's airport, along with thunder and lightning. More than 10 millimetres of rain pelted the city over a period of just 20 minutes, but the weather has now settled. The singer Neil Diamond has cancelled his tour of Australia and New Zealand after being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The 76-year-old performer, whose catalogue features songs like Sweet Caroline and Cherry Cherry, was due to play in Napier and Christchurch in March. Today he announced he would retire from touring, as the onset of the disease had made it hard to travel and perform. Mr Diamond says he'll continue to write and record music. It's 5 past 5. Sport, an 8-wicket haul from leg spinner Lloyd Pope has landed Australia a miracle quarter-final win over England at the Under-19 Cricket World Cup in Queenstown. Defending 127, Australia were facing one of their earliest exits from the tournament as their opponents raced to 45 without loss from 7 overs. That was before Pope snaffled 8 wickets for 35 runs, the best spell in an Under-19 World Cup, to skittle England for just 96. Meanwhile, the news isn't much better for the England senior team, with all-rounder Ben Stokes announcing he'll miss the start of his side's tour of New Zealand. Stokes will appear before the Bristol Magistrates Court on an affray charge on the same day as the first 2020 between England and the Black Caps next month. The 26-year-old was arrested in September for his part in a brawl outside a Bristol pub. Unseeded Belgian Elise Mertens has beaten women's 4th seed Elina Svitolina in straight sets to reach her first Grand Slam semi-final at the Australian Tennis Open. Mertens won the first set 6-4 before crushing Svitolina 6-love in the second. Meanwhile, men's top seed Rafael Nadal features in tonight's showpiece match in Melbourne. Nadal plays 6th seed Marin Cilic in the quarter-finals. Cilic will be Nadal's first top 10 opponent in his last 16 Grand Slams matches. The 29-year-old Croatian says he's feeling good about his game.
I'm very pleased. I felt that I played all 4 matches on a good quality. I'm feeling good with the game. I'm hitting the ball really nicely, taking chances, playing aggressive, taking the ball as early as I can. So overall, feeling good.
Marin Cilic, that's the news.
The fire.
Expectations today is dealing with the hotspot.
The fuel.
Some motorists would have experienced issues where they would have run out of fuel and they thought they still had fuel in their tanks.
And the fury.
I will not be lectured about what our military needs by a 5 deferment draft dodger.
Red hot coverage. Morning Report with Guy Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, DOC is under orders to ramp up its advocacy for the environment. Its head Lou Sanson talks about how it will do that. And after 10 human trafficking activists at Athkara on his 16 years documenting stories of victims and perpetrators. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. The northern North Island from Northland to Taumaranui and Taupo, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Scattered heavy showers today with thunderstorms and localised downpours. Patchy drizzle tomorrow morning. They're mostly fine, but isolated afternoon and evening showers inland. Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, also Waiata Upper. Mostly fine, but isolated showers inland today and patchy drizzle patches, the other way round, from Horowhenua to Wellington night and morning. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, also Buller, fine but isolated afternoon showers about the Marlborough Ranges. Westland and Fiordland, rain in Fiordland, spreading further north overnight. North and central Otago, also Dunedin, mostly fine but patchy drizzle about the coast tomorrow and isolated afternoon showers inland. The Clutha and Southland, occasional rain developing about the coast this evening, then spreading elsewhere for a time tomorrow before clearing. The Chatham Islands, occasional drizzle and fog. It's 9 minutes past 5.
Tō te maera e hoa mā he kōrero kei te haere, he kaupapa kei te karawhio. Welcome everyone to Checkpoint for Tuesday, the 23rd of January, a busy night tonight. Thank you for joining us. Coming up, the cost of recruiting Dr. Nigel Murray for the position of CEO at the Waikato DHB, and questions about why he was recruited at all. Freedom camping, which gets lots of response every time we cover it. What gets left behind by freedom campers, and the council's trying to deal with it in varying ways and with mixed success. And the fire which threatened the aluminium smelter at Tiwai Point and did burn through valuable conservation land. All of that coming up. But we begin tonight with the mental health system and the government's response to what has widely been described as a crisis in it, with 600 New Zealanders committing suicide in the past year, the highest number since the figure was first recorded, and pressure on resources across the system, from acute responses to inpatient care to alcohol and drug assessment, counselling and treatment. The government's response, as explicitly signalled before and during the election campaign, is a ministerial inquiry into mental health and addiction. It will report back by the end of October. The announcement was made in the Beehive exactly an hour ago. Here's Health Minister David Clark revealing who will be sitting on the inquiry.
The inquiry will be headed by Professor Ron Patterson. He will be the inquiry chair. He will be well known as a former Health and Disability Commissioner with experience in inquiries. Obviously, as Commissioner, he's led investigation into things that haven't worked in the system before. Dr. Barbara Disley is a former Executive Chair of the Mental Health Commission and currently the Chief Executive of Emerge Aotearoa, and she works in the mental health sector currently. Sir Mason Jury is a Professor of Māori Studies and again will need little introduction. He's someone with a deep experience in Māori health and culture and Māori well-being. Dean Rangihuna is a Māori consumer advocate with lived experience that he himself has talked about as a mental health consumer, and he will bring a valuable expertise to that panel. The youngest member is Josiah Tuala Mali'i, who is winner of the Prime Minister's Pacific Youth Leadership Award in 2016, with particular leadership experience in mental health, in Pacifica mental health and suicide. And Dr. Jemima Tiatia Seth, who is the co-head of the School of Pacific Studies at the University of Auckland, who has suicide prevention and postvention expertise. So a broad panel that will have a challenging job. They will also be supported, though, by a lived experience advisory group and a youth advisory group. And there is money in the budget for engagement with technology because we want to find new ways of reaching out to those who would not normally access a panel like this, so that we do hear the full picture of what is going on in the community. And we expect also, of course, to hear from those who are interacting directly with the system.
So that's the personnel as announced by David Clark himself basically exactly an hour ago. The Minister, David Clark, will be joining us live on Checkpoint after 6 tonight. Lots to discuss with him. The end of October is 9 months away, long enough to hear from people inside the system at every level. But is it too long when urgent responses are being sought in some areas? And we will hear about those later in the program. Basically, a crisis of demand in some places. Well, since the Prime Minister and the Health Minister made their announcement at 4 o'clock, our producer Bridget Burke and reporter Zach Fleming have been calling people who work in or receive care or support from the mental health system. And we begin their responses with Clinical Director of Alcohol and Drug Assessment Counselling, ADAC, Roger Brooking.
Well, I think the first need is probably related to funding. National cut something like between 140 million and 200 million out of the health budget in 2015-16. And it's not surprising that the suicide rate continues to go up. It's not surprising that emergency departments at hospitals are overwhelmed with people in a state of crisis, and they have to turn them away. And ultimately, as far as I can see, the problem is to do with a lack of funding. I don't think they need an inquiry to learn that. I think they do need an inquiry, because I think throwing money, which was kind of, because in 2017, National said, all right, well, we'll put $100 million back into the budget. And, Bill English claimed that would kind of solve the problem. And that's simply nonsense. I equate that there's an absolute need for an inquiry. And to me, if you try and fund solutions without an inquiry, that's a bit the same as having a patient who comes to you, you tell him what treatment he needs, but you don't actually assess him to see what's wrong. It just doesn't make any sense to me to try and to just throw money at the problem. You've got to actually find out where is it going wrong, where are the areas which need particular attention. There's a huge problem or gap in the interface between the Ministry of Health, health treatment, mental health treatment, addiction services, and the justice sector. Because an awful lot of these people end up, because of the conditions that they live in, they get into trouble with the police, they commit crime, and they end up in court. And frequently then end up in prison. Now, the national government announced that it was going to spend somewhere over $1 billion building a new prison. It would be great to see that money go into mental health, halfway houses for prisoners coming out. I mean, there's a whole variety of ways in which that money could be much better spent than building a new prison. So to me, the biggest problem is in that interface between health and justice.
That's Roger Brooking. He makes a point that many people in the sector make about people who slip through the cracks in the mental health system, particularly in the area of treatment services, ending up in the justice system. We will raise that with the Minister, David Clark, when he joins us straight after the news at 6 o'clock. So Roger Brooking, we've heard from him, Chief Executive of the Mental Health Foundation charity. Sean Robinson says he's pretty optimistic as the terms of reference cover the full range of issues. But Sean agrees with Roger Brooking, who we just heard from, that at the end of the day, it's going to come back to the issue not of what is said, but what is funded.
If the review, does its job thoroughly, then we should have the basis for a very solid action plan to take us forward with, a new approach to mental health for New Zealand that also has funding attached to it. This will mean nothing if it's not well resourced at the end of the day. Unfortunately, the whole response to mental health, the mental health system, the funding for that has been dramatically eroded over the last 10 years, as well as the sort of gaps and things that aren't being done at all. So, this is going to be something that requires significant investment.
Yes, so funding is the key issue so far. That's Mental Health Foundation Charity Chair Sean Robinson. Not all of the responses have been exactly positive so far. Executive Director of LGBT support organisation Rainbow Youth, Frances Arns, says she's disappointed there isn't a gender identity specialist on the panel.
In order to hear the voice of the community, you have to have the community as part of the consultation. And I think that it's a real gap, to be honest, and I really hope that at least in the youth advisory panel that they can have some representation from our community and to hear that voice. In terms of the terms of reference, like you mentioned, there's only kind of one point under the principles about meeting the needs of the LGBTI community, and it really feels like a gap to me when you look at our youth suicide statistics, which are the highest in the world, and the huge overrepresentation of LGBTI youth within that. It doesn't feel like there's enough focus that's been given to that.
That's Frances Arns, Executive Director of the LGBTI support organisation Rainbow Youth. Psychotherapist Carl McDonald, many of you will be familiar with his work, who's worked in mental health across addiction, domestic violence and specialist psychotherapy programs, is, well, cautiously optimistic.
The proof is going to be in the pudding. I mean, there's a huge workload for the appointees to report back with their findings before October. It does seem that there are provisions within the terms of reference in the cabinet paper for the review panel to travel, which is great, because I think the but for me is that people need to now get involved in this around the country. Professional groups, consumer groups, individuals need to feel that this is their review and that they can go along and have their say and have their views recorded for the purpose of the process. The downside potentially of such a broad review is it will need to focus on some very clear practical steps that are going to help people obtain better access to services. But I guess at this point we'll have to wait and see. There's nothing that jumps out at me as being a problem. It's great to see it getting underway. I know a lot of people have been waiting a long time to fix mental health services in New Zealand, and now we have an opportunity to.
Psychotherapist Carl McDonald, who talked about people waiting a long time. Some of them waited too long. Natasha Sadler, a mum, spoke to Checkpoint last year about her son Memphis, who desperately sought inpatient treatment for his synthetics addiction. He was on the waiting list for months, and before he could be treated, he died.
Although the inquiry won't be able to measure every individual case that highlights the inadequacies, I see how the government have pledged to hear and tell the stories that need to be told via the inquiry regarding mental health issues to measure what effective community responses are actually required. I hope that my son's story, Memphis' story, isn't lost amongst the inquiry. I heard the Prime Minister say that, there are already stories there in front of them, and that those stories won't be lost, and I hope they won't be. I really do hope they won't be. Minister Clark spoke of the reallocation of and or increase of resources to ensure real change, and I hope that's the case. The government have pledged to adequately fund health over time, in contrast to our previous government, where Clark has said it won't take them 9 years to make improvements in mental health. So I hope that is the case. I do see that there is a focus on young people to build our future adults. If that was to include up to 25-year-olds, then my son, if he was still here to tell his story, would have benefited from the decisions to be made. If not, then he may not have been any better off.
Natasha Sadler, whose son Memphis desperately needed and indeed sought treatment and didn't get it. The Minister himself will join us live on Checkpoint after 6. It's 21 minutes past 5. Checkpoint can tonight exclusively reveal the executive recruitment company that oversaw the hiring of Dr. Nigel Murray as CEO of the Waikato DHB was paid a total of $106,000 for the work. Dr. Murray resigned from the DHB in October after concerns were raised about his expenses, particularly his expenditure on travel. An Audit New Zealand report later found he'd spent public money on travel without proper authorisation, with approval sought after the fact, on occasion with no obvious or identifiable business purpose attached to it, and once during a period of sick leave. Checkpoint has spent months trying to clarify the exact reasons a recruitment company and a selection panel, which included the chair of the DHB and the Director General of Health, chose to hire Nigel Murray. Why? We've previously reported on the flags raised against hiring him during the recruitment process, but tonight we can tell you how much the process of hiring Dr. Murray cost, and also how he seems to have clocked up significant expenses during his earlier period as CEO of the Southland DHB. On the 28th of February 2014, Sheffield Search, whose website contains the slogan
"Sourcing and Evaluating New Zealand's Leaders,"
invoiced the Waikato District Health Board for $23,334. Under the heading Professional Services, the invoice contained just 12 words.
First instalment in respect of the search for a Chief Executive Officer.
First instalment were the keywords. Obviously, 2 more invoices would follow, each of them larger than the one before. Hiring a CEO for Waikato would prove an expensive business. And after all the money, the interviews, the tests and reference checks, the man they came up with was Nigel Murray. Why?
I don't know. I can only assume that he managed to hoodwink the chair and then the board.
That's Annette King, who at the time was opposition health spokesperson and had previously been health minister under Helen Clark.
And I can only assume that he dazzled the panel or the organisation that was hiring him.
Sheffield Search at a total cost of $106,556.58. Annette King was not being wise after the fact when she spoke to us earlier today. She raised concerns repeatedly during 2014, including a written question to then Health Minister Tony Ryle in June of 2014, just prior to Nigel Murray's appointment. Unlike Sheffield Search, unlike the selection panel and the DHB's board, she was adamant Nigel Murray was not the man for the job.
Well, as Minister of Health a few years earlier, I had the experience of Murray when he was the CEO of Southland DHB, before it was merged into the Southern DHB. And he left that DHB under a cloud.
We'll return to Annette King shortly. But what Checkpoint can tonight also reveal is that Dr. Murray's behaviour in Southland does seem to have been a predictor of his later behaviour in Waikato. In Southland, as when he moved north, his expenses were unusually high. Between January 2006 and September 2007, so a period of significantly less than 2 years, his expenses, not including salary, were $128,000, roughly half of which was related to domestic travel. $128,000. And when he got to Waikato, yes, Dr. Murray liked to travel. Infamously, as we now all know. But Annette King says she was blowing the whistle because of the circumstances under which Dr. Murray had left Southland for a higher-paying job in Canada, and also his relationship with senior medical staff in the Southland DHB.
And he left in a bad odour with many of the staff, particularly the medical staff. And so I had grave doubts about him. And when I heard he was going to be likely to be hot in Waikato, I did warn them to look closely at his record.
Which presumably Sheffield and the selection panel did. The Sheffield invoices kept coming. First the $26,000 in February 2014, then a second invoice the following month.
Professional services, including our fee and disbursements, $40,598.02.
And then a third, in June.
Professional services, including our fee and disbursements, $42,624.56.
Adding up to that total of $106,000 plus a little bit of change. Whether that's value for money depends, of course, on whether you get the right candidate. Nigel Murray left in disgrace. He travelled without formal approval. He overspent. On occasion, he ignored spending protocols. And in 3 years at the DHB, he ran up $218,000 in expenses, which, oddly, on a monthly basis, was similar to his expenses spending in Southland. So, when reference checks were done, who from the Southland DHB recommended Dr. Murray? No one would tell us. We tried the Official Information Act, declined with privacy and confidentiality given as a reason. We called Sheffield. They didn't phone back. Clearly $106,000 doesn't cover media interviews after the fact. So we still don't really know why Dr. Murray got the job. But he did.
And it's such a shame for the people of Waikato, and also for some of the really good work that was going on there, particularly in primary care, where the primary health organisation there was setting up a very progressive approach, only to have Dr. Murray cut across it with his own grand plans, which you now hear have cost millions of dollars, chasing his dreams in America and Australia and other places.
Which wasn't how it was meant to work out. One of the final pieces of Sheffield search correspondence we obtained under the Official Information Act was a letter from the recruitment experts to the chairman of the Waikato DHB, Bob Simcock. It reads as follows.
Dear Bob, congratulations on the appointment of Nigel Murray as Chief Executive Officer. It has been a pleasure to work with you and the board on this successful assignment. I am sure that Nigel will make a strong contribution to the organisation.
Ian Taylor from Sheffield Search did in fact text me back refusing to comment, citing privacy issues, the Privacy Act. Former board chair Bob Simcock, Waikato DHB of course, with whom Mr Taylor liaised over Dr Murray's appointment, did not return our calls today. He is still able to if he's so inclined, if you'd like to come on Checkpoint Live. As for Dr Murray himself, Checkpoint has been unable to reach him for comment, and we have been trying for a considerable amount of time. 5:28. Christchurch City Council will consider temporarily chlorinating its water supply after engineering assessments of the city's wells revealed some of them may be susceptible to contamination. Christchurch's drinking water is drawn from 156 wells located at 56 sites across the city. In a briefing to media this afternoon, council staff revealed that in December, the Canterbury Water Assessor removed the city's secure bore status. Now, the Mayor, Leanne Dalzell, says the water is still safe to drink, but assessments by engineers raise concerns that some of the below-ground wells may not be sufficiently sealed to prevent surface groundwater contamination, particularly after heavy rainfall. Ms Dalzell says on Thursday the council will consider a report looking at how to safeguard against contamination until the wells have been upgraded, which may include temporarily chlorinating the water.
With the loss of secure status having taken effect on the last working day of last year, the 22nd of December, in actual fact we need to consider other options during this period of time, and that is what the report will cover on Thursday. Obviously we need to look at whether we can fast track that program of work and bring it forward, and we may need to take other safeguards as well. The advice that we have received is that it is safe to drink our water. There is no impact on our groundwater. That is not the issue. The issue here is that the risk of contamination although slight, the consequences are significantly greater, and of course without the engineering sign-off that we would normally have in order to retain secure status, we have to ask ourselves what it is that we can do.
Leanne Dalzell, the Canterbury Medical Officer of Health, Alistair Humphrey, says he would be concerned if the council didn't opt to temporarily chlorinate.
Christchurch for a long time has had an untreated water supply, which as Medical Officer of Health, as a public official responsible for the oversight of the safety of our water, I have been satisfied and have said publicly that I am satisfied with the extra work that Christchurch City Council has always put in to ensure that its water is safe. However, from a public health perspective, the principle of a multi-barrier approach you will often hear described, and that is the more barriers to contamination you can put into place, the better.
That is the Canterbury Medical Officer of Health, Alistair Humphrey. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ, and thank you for being with us. Coming up on the program, the economic impact of Rocket Lab's successful rocket launch. Former Shortland Street star Rene Naufahu is sentenced to 1 year's home detention for the sexual assault of 6 students. The weather with Met Service meteorologist John Law is a new feature on the program, and of course the Minister David Clark will be joining us after 6. We're getting lots of feedback already. We love it. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're on Facebook, of course, and you can email if you have something to say at length. checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. 28 minutes to 6, which feels like a good time to go to the headlines with Katrina.
The former Health and Disability Commissioner Ron Patterson will head the ministerial inquiry into mental health and addiction. The Health Minister David Clark says significant change is needed in the sector. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has flagged a potential increase in funding following the inquiry. A coroner says a snowboarding coach who committed suicide was let down by mental health services in central Otago. Coroner Anna Tutton says their failure to assess Benjamin Jolly was incomprehensible and inexcusable. The Commerce Commission has laid 59 charges against a steel manufacturer for making false and misleading claims about its steel mesh. The charges against Eurosteel, also known as Euro Corporation Limited, relate to claims made between 2012 and 2015. The company appeared in the Auckland District Court today and will reappear next month. The Christchurch City Council will discuss temporarily chlorinating its water supply on Thursday after engineers said some wells are susceptible to contamination. The council insists the city's water is still safe to drink. The recruitment company, which hired the former Waikato DHB Chief Executive Nigel Murray, was paid more than $100,000 for the work. Dr Murray resigned in October after it was revealed he racked up expenses of more than $200,000 over 3 years. A reference was provided from the former Southland DHB, where Dr Murray was CEO from 2006 until 2007, despite his departure under what a former health minister describes as a cloud. A spectacular thunderstorm in Napier and Hastings has eased after bringing torrential rain and violent winds. More than 10 millimetres of rain pelted the city over a period of just 20 minutes. And the singer Neil Diamond has cancelled his Australasian tour after being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The 76-year-old was due to play in Napier and Christchurch in March. That's sad news. It's 26 minutes to 6. I'll be back at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Let's go to business news now. Around 100 jobs are on the line in Gisborne at a wood processing factory. Jukin plans to cut production of plywood and laminated timber products at its Matawhiro plant because of a weak Japanese housing market. They are a big employer there. The Gisborne plant has been losing money despite efforts to streamline and economise. It will continue to process logs into other products, and its plant near Masterton in the Wairarapa will continue to operate as usual. Now, Jukin's General Manager David Hilliard told our business reporter Jonathan Mitchell it's a difficult proposal, but he says necessary.
We are a Japanese-owned company, and the plant in Gisborne was set up specifically to supply product for that market. Our parent company in Japan is one of the largest independent house suppliers in Japan, And so the products we make in our plant were specifically for that. And unfortunately, the machinery isn't best suited to make product for other markets. So that's led us to this conclusion.
How big a decline is there going on in Japan? Is this just temporary, or is this going to be long felt?
Oh, no, it's been declining over a number of years, and I haven't got the figures that would say how far it's declined, but certainly demand for our products has declined significantly.
So you're not the only one caught out by this?
Not at all. The other suppliers into the Japanese market would be feeling the same. But we can't blame Japan. It's just simply that their age demographic is changing as it is in a lot of other developed countries in the world. And therefore the demand for the sort of housing that we build is declining.
But this is certainly, not just for you, but, that upper East Coast area, another nail in the coffin for the jobs in that region.
Oh, it absolutely is. And remember, we live here in these regions. We are part of it. So it affects us as much as it affects anybody else. And so if we can see growth in these regions, we absolutely want that to happen.
There was the General Manager of Wood Processing Company Jukin, Dave Hilliard, talking to Jonathan Mitchell. Jonathan Mitchell beams in live himself. Happy New Year, Jono, joining us from Wellington. This is big news in and around Gisborne because Jukin is a big employer there. What happens next for workers?
That's right, John. They employ more than 200 workers, so if this proposal goes ahead, they'll be losing half their workforce. Now, staff have a couple of weeks to respond to the proposal. Then the company will make the final decisions. They won't give an exact time frame, but Jukin does admit that it is tough to get jobs in the regions, especially Gisborne, and they'll be doing as much as possible to help affected staff.
Jono, what... I don't know, really. I mean, what more can we say about that? The staff are going to respond. We're assured, I guess, by Jukin that this is a good faith process, so we just have to wait, really, the outcome of the next couple of weeks, do we?
They'll be putting submissions forward, the workers. The company will be going through the process to go through those, and then we'll have an outcome.
What happened on the markets today, Jonathan?
Well, some news this afternoon out of Japan. The Bank of Japan held their monetary policy steady, but they think inflation will get to their midpoint target band around 2% by next year. Here in New Zealand, the top 50 index fell 28 points to 8,307. There was a fall for Z Energy today. They put out a statement. They're forecasting lower earnings because of a squeeze on fuel supplies and higher oil prices. So that led the market down. And the dollar is a bit mixed, 73.2 US cents, 91.7 Australian.
John, thanks so much, Jonathan Mitchell from Wellington. If you are a Jukin worker or you are the family member of one of them, we'd love to talk to you about this process unfolding in Gisborne. Now, Texas 2101, we really would love to hear from you. Let's go to a new feature on Checkpoint, which is the weather direct from the Met Service. Here is Met Service meteorologist John Law. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora. Well, compared to that wetter start we had first thing on Tuesday in the Auckland region, we are looking at generally a drier day for Wednesday. Still rather a cloudy start with a few spots of patchy drizzle, but brighter and drier through the afternoon, and highs still around about 27 degrees Celsius. That cloud, though, quite widely across the northern and the western parts, lingering for a time in New Plymouth. A few spots of drizzle there, but still very warm throughout the North Island. For the Kapiti Coast, a cloudy start, a few spots of patchy drizzle, but generally a drier day. And for Wellington, highs back to 26 degrees Celsius. But some of the best temperatures will be on the eastern side of the North Island, with highs back to around about 30 degrees Celsius for Gisborne, with plenty of sunshine. Heading down towards the South Island, the East Coast again the place to be, with plenty of dry and sunny conditions down through Christchurch, and highs back to around about 31 degrees Celsius. But there will be more cloud on the western coast and pushing up in towards the south, bring with it some patchy rain or drizzle. And that's it from me.
John Law, very hot in Invercargill today, not so hot tomorrow. Temperature high of about 21 in the south. Let's look at New Zealand's burgeoning space industry. Not a phrase that I would have thought I'd use terribly long ago. Well, the leaders of it say the successful launch of a rocket over the weekend is a giant leap forward for the sector. Rocket Lab successfully launched a rocket into orbit for the first time on Sunday, deploying 3 miniature satellites shortly after taking off from the Mahia Peninsula, not far from Gisborne, where we were with Jono before. This makes New Zealand the smallest country by population ever to launch a rocket into space. Logan Church spoke to the people at the forefront of what is a space industry about what this means for New Zealand.
5, 4,
3,
ignition.
The successful takeoff of an Electron rocket by Kiwi company Rocket Lab on Sunday has launched New Zealand into a new kind of space race. Its chief executive, Peter Beck, says the challenge is now to commercialise the smaller rocket, which carries smaller satellites.
We're ahead of the pack by a number of years, and obviously the first to get there. But also, what we offer with respect to technology and product is quite significantly advanced to what others are currently working on.
Mr. Beck says his company is now working to increase the frequency of the launches to once every 2 weeks in 2019. Increasing the number of launches and decreasing the satellite size will dramatically reduce the cost of putting a satellite into space. Mr. Beck says it could cost less than $10 million each. He says this will establish New Zealand as a leader in space business.
Milk powder is great, but nobody stands back and goes, that's incredible. Historically, you go to space to demonstrate to the world that you're a superpower. And if you look at the countries that have gone to space, they are all superpowers.
New Zealand companies and organisations are keeping a close eye on developments in the space sector. One of those is the government-funded Centre for Space Science Technology in Alexandra, who use imagery from satellites to collect data on everything from climate change to tourism. Its chief executive, Steve Cotter, says it's now much more feasible for smaller organisations, such as his, to put up a satellite.
If we identify a gap in the data or a business opportunity, we'd certainly jump on that. 5-10 years ago, these satellites that were built were tens, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars, and it took 10 years to build. Now you're able to throw these little CubeSats together with basically off-the-shelf components.
The government space agency closely monitors launches, working with the Federal Aviation Administration in the United States and the United Nations. Its head, Peter Crabtree, says all rocket launches have to be signed off by the authorities, as well as any satellites that leaves New Zealand soil. He says he expects New Zealand's space industry to grow rapidly.
We're in a part of the planet that doesn't face congestion in the air or on the seas. It's favourable in terms of getting the launch angles. But then you overlay it, New Zealand's a great place to do business. It's a low-cost business environment, but it's got high-quality regulations, it's a stable environment in terms of international investment. And so it ticks loads of boxes, which knocks out a lot of other jurisdictions.
Murray Mackay, the founder of space advocacy group Kiwi Space, says a growing space industry provides another benefit: employment.
It's exciting to have launch capability in New Zealand that now showcases some career options for New Zealand graduates. There's more opportunities at the universities now for people to get involved with developing satellites, technology payloads.
Mr. Mackay says the industry is a whole new frontier for New Zealand, where the sky is the limit. For Checkpoint, call Logan Church Tanei.
7 to 6, let's return to politics. Tomorrow, politicians will arrive at Ratanapa near Whanganui to celebrate the birthday of T.W. Ratana, a faith leader and prophet, of course. Like Waitangi, Ratana marks the beginning of the political year and often a platform for political promises. Our Māori Issues correspondent Mihi Nairangi Forbes is there, and she will be covering Ratana for us. Kia ora, Mihi. What is expected tomorrow, and what is on the agenda there?
Well, kia ora, John. Well, as you say, John, it is a big empty stage at the moment, but tomorrow this little community will be packed with suits and ties, and all the kids will be running around looking at them thinking they all look a bit strange. But unlike Ratana, I'm not a prophet and I can't see into ahead of time, so I can only guess what the script is for, the major production that rolls out tomorrow. But it's set to be entertaining. Last year, you may recall Gareth Morgan from the Opportunity Party. Remember, he held the audience with his speech on the treaty. He had all the eyes and the kia oras from the nannies in the crowd, but then he singled out Winston Peters. He took a gamble on the crowd and he called Mr. Peters and Uncle Tom, and the rest is history, really. Yeah. I think the year before, you may recall, the former PM, John Key, said that New Zealand wasn't settled peacefully. Again, wrong crowd. And a highlight last year was also from the other former MP, Bill English. You will recall his performing outstanding whai kōrero he did here at Ratana. He stunned most of the crowd, but not so much of a real supporter this year. But I think he may have started something, because we understand that Greens leader James Shaw will also be performing in Mihi and Te Reo. He's practising away, and so tomorrow will be his opportunity on the pai too.
Of course, you mentioned every party there except Labour, I think, unless my mind is turning into a sieve. And Labour won all the Māori seats. And after Ratana, Jacinda Ardern is heading to Waitangi, where she is spending the longest time a PM has spent there, certainly in my memory, Mihi. What's all of this about?
Well, I think interesting, but yes, I think it's being received really, really well up there. The people I've talked to think it's great. She's going to go and listen, and you know, there's lots more at Waitangi than just the day that you see on television. Yeah. There's stalls, there's political forums, there's the iwi leaders usually meet, and a couple of days beforehand there's lots to do. But I think in the, you know, when you listen to the words that she said, she wants to talk to the northern iwi, she wants to talk about transparency and partnership. She's making a real point there. It'll be interesting to see how they're received here tomorrow at Ratana as well.
Yeah, Labour have a debt of gratitude. Am I overstating the case then, given the extraordinary support they received from Māori in the election?
Yeah, absolutely. But if you look at her cabinet, you know, she has got quite a number of Māori MPs in really key ministerial positions, and we'll see those tomorrow as the Penny Henares and the Calvin Davises, Nanaia Mahuta, Willie Jackson. They all turn up, Meka Whaitiri, with their ministerial roles. I think Māori will be happy to see that front row, you know, in such prominent positions. And it sounds like, you know, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is listening. If you think about the arrangements for Waitangi, with the suggestion that she might be participating in the formalities at the top marae up there at the treaty grounds. These are not just like some big PR kind of guru has come up with this. This is her core ministerial team working with her. You can see it and hear it.
Mihi Narangi Forbes, we look forward to your coverage from Ratana tomorrow and from Waitangi, of course. Thank you, Mihi. Lovely to talk to you live the night before Ratana kicks off. It's 13 minutes to 6. The former Shortland Street star, Rene Naufahu, used his position of power to sexually groom young actors who he then abused during one-on-one classes. The Crown Prosecutor compared the power imbalance to the Me Too campaign that has exposed countless allegations of sexual abuse, ending the careers of several Hollywood personalities. Naufahu was today sentenced to 1 year of home detention. Our reporter Edward Gay was in court and filed this report.
Prosecutor Kristen Lummis said Naufahu breached the trust of 6 students.
Despite it not being a traditional classroom teaching situation, the Crown says that power imbalance is still present. And it's the type of power imbalance that the Me Too campaign has highlighted in recent times.
She said Naufahu was 18 to 24 years older than his victims, whom he'd groomed by inviting them to take part in one-on-one acting classes.
Pulling them out of the group classes, telling them that they were special, that they had real talent, that he could develop it, that they were going to be amazing.
Instead, the 47-year-old touched them inappropriately and kissed them without warning.
Whilst it is not physical harm, it is the emotional and the psychological harm that is significant, and it's that the type of grooming that has occurred here that has been so difficult for each of the victims to deal with.
Naufahu's lawyer, Ron Mansfield, described his client as an enthusiastic acting coach who'd helped many actors.
His enthusiasm and passion for the craft became personal, and the lines were blurred between what was appropriate conduct from him as the tutor to conduct which was clearly and acknowledged as inappropriate.
Mr Mansfield said his client had voluntarily sought help from mental health professionals and was now working in construction.
He still has a lot to give. He's made mistakes, he's acknowledged those mistakes. There's every indication that he has taken real and meaningful steps to rehabilitate and reform, to understand what went wrong and why and the impact it's had on the woman concerned. And he's committed to making sure it doesn't happen again.
Judge Rob Renane said one of the victims described being groomed by Naufahu and all had been left with ongoing emotional damage.
Common themes for the victims are shame and guilt. They, of course, have no reason at all to feel any guilt whatsoever. You are the guilty one, not them.
The judge said he also had an affidavit from psychologist Dr. Stephanie Dillon.
She suggests you are genuinely appalled by your behaviour because you now have the label of sexual offender the very type of person you abhor. That seems to me, Mr. Ngauwhahu, to be a very self-centred response.
The judge started with a sentence of 2 years and 10 months before taking time off for Ngauwhahu's early guilty plea and previous good character. He settled on a sentence of a year's home detention, but Judge Renane declined to give any discount for remorse.
You publicly shamed victims by denying the offending. That was not merely by denying the charges that you faced, which was entirely your right. Your denial found expression by publicly saying the allegations were ridiculous and ludicrous. After your guilty pleas, you again went public and apologised for being too passionate and confusing boundaries and emotions. In my view, publicly minimising your offending.
In a statement following the sentencing, Ngauwhahu says no one's perfect and there's always room for growth. He says he's made mistakes and learned from them. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Edward Gayahau.
Some residents on Auckland's North Shore were left with pools for cul-de-sacs after 52 millimetres of rain was dumped in just 1 hour this morning. 52 mils in an hour. In places the water reached waist height and wheelie bins floated around the streets. Some Albany residents say a nearby development is to blame, but as Laura Tupou reports, the site manager there says that's not the case.
Sophie Sue left her house on Samuels Lane this morning expecting to work a full day. But that all changed mid-morning when it started to bucket down and she received a call from her mother-in-law.
Just water all over around, so yeah, she freaked out and called me.
She says the water flooded the entire house, damaging furniture and electronics.
Skirting, carpet, and also the vanities, yeah, like that, and also the couch, laptop damaged, and also my iPad damaged.
Ms. Sue's house was the only one to be flooded on her lane. She says they're devastated, but thankful to her neighbours who were helping with the clean-up.
It came back home, like all the people around the house, they just tried to brush the water out. I'm so appreciated.
Neighbour Peter Berry was sweeping out the garage. He says there was a huge amount of rain, but water wasn't just coming from above.
There is a sewer line that runs from the development right through the middle of the road. It ends up over there, and all the stormwater came through the sewer line and then bubbled up through the road and out where there's a manhole just up under there, and it shouldn't have come through it shouldn't come through that because it was stormwater, and it was all clayey as well, so it was very, very dirty.
The council says it has water engineers investigating drains, including at the Verdant Lane development at the end of the cul-de-sac. It says it can't comment further until the investigation is complete. But Watercare says it discovered a wastewater pipe had been laid by a developer who is proposing to put in a new subdivision. It says stormwater was using the pipe as a pathway to make its way through the soil, and as a goodwill gesture, contractors are about to cap the pipe to prevent further issues. CHEC Vertical is the developer, and its site manager, Simon Gibbs, would only say the development is not connected to the sewer system. He would not acknowledge whether water was coming out of the pipe, which belongs to the site. Meanwhile, on nearby Sucklings Lane, more residents are trying to mop up the mess, which they also say was caused by the development. Mark Nielsen says a pool of water also settled in their cul-de-sac in less than half an hour.
To the point where the wheelie bins were floating around the street, and it was up to our waist within about less than probably 5 or 6 minutes.
He says it was a close shave.
We're very, very lucky that none of us have actually had anything, because basically it's come within millimetres of coming into the house.
The deluge also put a dampener on his 17-year-old daughter Phoebe's day.
I came out and my car was like fully submerged, like the exhaust pipe and everything, and it's my first car as well. So like it's all flooded inside, so I'm just trying to empty it all out.
But she says there is a silver lining.
I guess at least it's not our house underwater, so yeah, that's the main thing.
Mō te hōtaka o te ata, ko Laura Tupou aho.
If there is a summer story in New Zealand outside the weather, drownings and beach rescues and the road toll, of course, it may be the tension between freedom campers and locals at tourism hotspots. Now, council by council in many parts of the country, a balance is being sought and not always found. In New Plymouth, for example, residents say a decision to throw the doors open to freedom campers has backfired, putting a popular reserve and surf spot under pressure. The Waifakaiho river mouth has been overrun since the new and more relaxed freedom camping bylaw was introduced late last year. We covered it when it happened. Well, it has happened. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin paid a visit.
On a drizzly North Taranaki morning, about 60 freedom camping vehicles are parked up at the Waiwakaio river mouth. About half a dozen tents have also sprung up on the reserve, and 2 portaloos are a pointer to the stress existing facilities are under. The president of the New Plymouth Surf Riders Club, Daisy Day, says it's becoming difficult for surfers and other casual visitors to find a park at the reserve.
Well, the open slather certainly isn't working, so I think they're clutching at straws, wondering how to do things. So again, it's that factor where we're just outed out of our own playground, so to speak.
Ms Day says frustrated surfers are beginning to take things into their own hands.
I've heard of a couple of incidents of people just rapping on the doors of the cars or of the windows of the cars saying, please, can you just move? We're out surfing and you're not, type of thing.
Ms Day says the majority of the freedom campers are good souls and willing to share, but they have taken over the place. Ted Burrows was out walking his dog. He says the freedom camping situation has got worse since the Kaikoura earthquakes and Lonely Planet's endorsement of Taranaki.
We're even getting caravans pull up. They're washing out on their lines. They've got all the kids' bikes all lined up and they park up for 3 or 4 days, free holiday. So I think we in New Plymouth here being seen as a soft touch.
Mr Burrows wants all camping banned at the reserve.
It's not a campsite. It's a reserve. It's where the white baiters and fishermen come down here, the surfers come down here. It's a very, very popular little area. People come down and walk their dogs. And I see it overtaken like this. It has to stop.
Thai tourist Gump arrived at Waiwakaio last night. It's no surprise to him why it's so popular with freedom campers.
There are so many car park area, and also there are very nice toilet too with the flush. So that is, I think, it's kind of idealism for the backpacker who want to stay in the free campsite and have flush toilet, and also have a cold shower. And yeah, we quite not so surprised that there are a lot of people because it's a very nice place.
Gump thinks the freedom campers are good news for the local economy. French visitor Anne-Loc Tussaud heard about Waiwakaio via the Campermate app and expected it to be busy. She could see why locals might find the number of freedom campers disturbing.
Yeah, I could understand because I think in the morning there is no space to park, so it's obviously a problem.
Would you understand if they put a limit on the number of vehicles here?
Yeah, I think it could be a good idea.
The New Plymouth Mayor, Neil Holdham, says Waiwakaio is just one of about 25 freedom camping sites in the district, and its popularity this summer had Court Council on the hop.
It's clear that the congestion down there with the number of visitors has surprised us, and so we'll be looking in reviewing the bylaw and looking to put some sort of limits in there to make sure our local people can have access to the facilities.
But that doesn't wash with walker Andrea Harrab, who couldn't understand why the council needs to wait for the review, which is scheduled for March-April.
They know what's going on. Why? How long do we have to leave it? I think we can all review it right here, right now. Why do we need to wait to review it? We can see exactly what's going on.
In the meantime, the council has installed 2 portaloos, increased rubbish collection and monitoring of the reserve at a cost to ratepayers of about $6,000 over the summer. Money well spent, according to the mayor. Ina motu mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Robin Martin tēnei.
Robin Martin, one of our excellent regional reporters based around the country. After the news at 6, David Clark is going to join us to discuss the ministerial inquiry into the mental health system and alcohol and drug treatment facilities. This is a big announcement by the government today. Lots of people saying the system could do with improving. Here is Anne, who texted in saying to John Campbell in praise of mental health services at Kapiti Coast Health. A relative diagnosed with a severe mental health problem at danger to himself and maybe others was within a week just before Christmas given an appointment. Had to go every day to an appointment for about a week, even on Christmas Day. Was very quickly assessed and given the right medication. I cringe at the amount of money the panel investigating the mental health services will be paid. Would it be better not just to use that money to train people to work as mental health professionals? Much to discuss with David Clark back after the news.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The Health Minister says there may be a boost for funding for mental health once the government receives the results of an inquiry. The former Health and Disability Commissioner Ron Patterson will head the inquiry that will hear public submissions around the country. The inquiry will report back to the government by the end of October. The Minister David Clark says that date has been set for a reason.
In the sense that it will give time to feed into a budget process. There are some who are of a view that a whole lot more funding is needed, and certainly with the increased uptake that might be a starting point for consideration. But there's also a view that some of the money is not being spent as well as it could be, and it may be a matter of reallocating resource.
David Clark. The establishment of the inquiry is part of the Labour-led government's 100-day plan. The Christchurch City Council will consider temporarily chlorinating its water supply after engineering assessments of the city's wells revealed some of them may be susceptible to contamination. The council waited a month to make public that the Canterbury Water Assessor removed the city's secure bore status last month. The Canterbury Medical Officer of Health, Alistair Humphrey, says the best option is to temporarily chlorinate the water, which the council will consider at a meeting on Thursday. He says flooding is one way the water could become contaminated.
But there are many other ways in which surface water or other contaminants could egress into a wellhead that was not secured, that lay below ground level. And I can't, there's no way of predicting any particular possibility.
The Canterbury Medical Officer of Health, Alistair Humphrey. The Commerce Commission has laid 59 charges against a steel manufacturer for making false and misleading claims about its steel mesh. The charges laid under the Fair Trading Act against Eurosteel, also known as Euro Corporation Limited, relate to false claims made between 2012 and 2015. The Commission alleges the company labelled its steel mesh product with tags stating it was 500 earthquake grade steel when it wasn't. It also alleges Eurosteel did not independently test all batches of the mesh from April 2013, which it was required to do. The company appeared in the Auckland District Court today and will next appear next month. The Commerce Commission says it has also laid charges against another company but could not disclose information. A former assets manager for a publicly funded health provider and trustee of an iwi charity has pleaded guilty to fraud. Saul Roberts pleaded guilty to 5 charges in the High Court at Auckland today. Te Manu Kōrehi reporter Shannon Haunui-Thompson has more.
In 2009, while at the Kawerau Iwi Tribal Authority, Roberts received a secret payment of $45,000 in return for withdrawing submissions he had lodged on behalf of the authority against a district plan change. The company that made the payment was unaware Roberts was acting without the knowledge of his employer. In 2012, while employed by Te Rōpū Taurima o Manukau Trust, Mr Roberts received secret payments in return for contracting work to certain suppliers. He will be sentenced next month. Ko Shannon Haunui-Thompson, aho.
The imbalance of power that Shortland Street star Renee Naufahu took advantage of has been compared to the Me Too campaign that's rocked Hollywood. Today, Naufahu was sentenced to a year's home detention after admitting sexually abusing 6 of his students. The Crown Prosecutor, Kristen Lummis, said Naufahu was also much older than his victims, between 18 and 24 years older at the time the offending took place.
Despite it not being a traditional classroom teaching situation, the Crown says that power imbalance is still present. And it's the type of power imbalance that the Me Too campaign has highlighted in recent times.
Kristen Lummis said Naufahu groomed his students by taking them out of his group acting classes and giving them one-on-one classes. Firefighters have found what appear to be human remains in a house truck which burnt to the ground this morning. The truck was destroyed in the blaze, which started at about 11:15 this morning. The man who lived in the truck is missing. The police say fire crews found the remains inside, but they are waiting for a forensic pathologist to confirm it. They'll carry out a scene examination tomorrow morning and are appealing for information from the public. The leaders of New Zealand's burgeoning space industry say the successful launch of a rocket over the weekend is a giant leap forward for the sector. Rocket Lab successfully launched a rocket into orbit for the first time on Sunday, deploying 3 miniature satellites shortly after taking off from Mahia Peninsula. This makes New Zealand the smallest country by population ever to launch a rocket into space. The head of the New Zealand Space Agency, Peter Crabtree, says he expects New Zealand's space industry to grow rapidly.
We're in a part of the planet that doesn't face congestion in the air or on the seas. It's favourable in terms of getting the launch angles. But then if you overlay it, New Zealand's a great place to do business. It's a low-cost business environment, but it's got high-quality regulations, it's a stable environment in terms of international investment. And so it ticks loads of boxes, which knocks out a lot of other jurisdictions.
Peter Crabtree. It's 6:05. Sports. The England cricket team all-rounder Ben Stokes will miss the start of his side's tour of New Zealand due to a court appearance. Stokes will appear in court on an affray charge on the same day as the first 2020 between England and the Black Caps next month. The 26-year-old was arrested in September for his part in a brawl outside a Bristol pub. Meanwhile, the Black Caps paceman Seth Rance hopes his performance in yesterday's 7-wicket 2020 win over Pakistan will be enough to get another start at Eden Park on Thursday. The Central District's seamer took 3 wickets yesterday, but knows he's got stiff competition for a spot in the current Black Caps lineup.
Obviously taking each game as it comes and hopefully get a chance at Eden Park, and again that'll be another challenge if I get to play and do my best, and that's all I can do.
Black Caps bowler Seth Rance. Unseeded Belgium Elise Mertens has beaten women's 4th seed Elina Svitolina in straight sets to reach her first Grand Slam semi-final at the Australian Tennis Open. Mertens won the first set 6-4 before crushing Svitolina 6-love in the second. Meanwhile, New Zealand's Michael Venus and his Chinese Taipei partner have been beaten in straight sets in their second round mixed doubles match. And the Highlanders will take on the Chiefs in a New Zealand Super Rugby derby in Fiji in June. The Dunedin-based side have agreed to stage a home game in Suva on June 30 against the Chiefs, who have played the Crusaders in Fiji the past 2 seasons. The Highlanders will also play 7 games in Dunedin, but there's no room for a match in Invercargill. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the science of human fertility. Massey University's Len Blackwell talks about his work to produce a test that tells a woman exactly when she's able to conceive. We have a wind on the word of Venezuela's child gangsters. Our pundit is the economist Brian Easton. And Trevor Ricci's Worlds of Music presents the gypsy hits of Tito's Yugoslavia. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, afternoon news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. The northern part of the North Island, that's from Northland to Taumarunui and Taupo, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Scattered heavy showers today with thunderstorms and localised downpours. Patchy drizzle tomorrow morning. They're mostly fine, but isolated afternoon and evening showers inland. Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, also Wairarapa, mostly fine but isolated showers inland today, and drizzle patches from Horowhenua to Wellington night and morning. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Buller, fine but isolated afternoon showers about the Marlborough Ranges. Westland and Fiordland, rain in Fiordland spreading further north overnight. North and central Otago, also Dunedin, mostly fine but patchy drizzle about the coast tomorrow and isolated afternoon showers inland. Clutha and Southland, occasional rain developing about the coast this evening, then spreading elsewhere for a time tomorrow before clearing. The Chatham Islands, occasional drizzle and fog. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Baden. Let's return to where we began tonight. The government has announced former Health and Disability Commissioner Ron Patterson will lead a ministerial inquiry into mental health and addiction. The inquiry is part of the Labor-led government's 100-day plan and is expected to report back with its findings by the end of October. We began the program with David Clark announcing who will be on the inquiry. In a moment we'll hear more from the Health Minister, who was in fact standing by and is going to listen to our next guest as she goes to air. She is Claire Aitken. Claire is the Program Director of Moana House in Dunedin, which provides residential care for adult male offenders who want to change their lives. Now, many have a history of alcohol and drug abuse. Claire has issued a stop referrals notice because she is already above capacity and has a waiting list, wait for this, of 148 people. It will take her years to clear it. She told our producer Bridget Burke her program has not had an increase in funding for 9 years.
every single one of our contracts are up on the 30th of June 2018. And of course, one of the things the government, I'm sure, will want to do is they won't be wanting to promise new money or put money where they don't feel it's going to be well used or worthwhile. So the real concern is that if there is funding for a service such as ours past 30th of June, then it'll simply be a rollover, which we have had for years, with no funding increase whatsoever. And so that's really concerning.
How has Ministry of Health behaved in terms of its responsibilities to you as a provider?
Ministry of Health's been fantastic. They're absolutely fantastic. They've been fantastic to us. They've really supported our service and helped keep us afloat for the last 9 years. And I guess the biggest problems we have are with the Southern DHB and the Department of Corrections, where Department of Corrections have increased nothing. And of course, remembering that we work largely solely with people in the criminal justice system, and usually coming to us from prison or on a community-based sentence. And the Southern DHB have actually taken money off us like they have off many providers because they simply can't balance their books. And so the NGO sector, particularly in the south, is really struggling, and it's been difficult for years. But Ministry of Health pay, in my understanding, the DHB something called future funding track money, but the DHB keeps it and they don't give it out. So not only have we not received any increases, we haven't received that future funding track money either. And we're not alone. You know, if you're in the southern region, that's the way it goes.
Have you approached?
Absolutely, I
Southern
approach
DHB?
all the time, yes.
Chris Fleming?
Not him personally, but I've met with managers very recently saying we've got this huge unmet demand for Māori and Pacific people presenting at our service and our community aspect of our service, and we received no money for it. And they did admit that, yes, what we were saying was true, but they just said it'll take years to sort out, and that's just too bad because they keep all that money, they don't give it out to the community.
And so who is suffering as a result of them not passing on that funding that you're entitled to?
Well, it does make it, working in the NGO sector does make it, makes it very, very difficult and very tight. So endeavouring to employ staff, and you can't pay anything like what staff in a DHB get. We simply don't have the funds, and trying to attract and keep and take on new staff is really, really challenging. Coupled with that, of course, the staff that you have to train them, and of course we would never not train people.
What's happening to the 148 men on the waiting list now?
Well, they'll sit. Some of them are in the community, the bulk of them are in prison, and of course what happens is they're reliant on when they go to the parole board to go into a treatment program, it could be ours or it could be another, they actually have to have a place to go into. And so that's the difficulty, that many of those won't get a place. So they will be, of course, will leave prison, and the much higher likelihood that they will leave prison with nothing, you know, in terms of the kind of support that they perhaps would be best for them to have.
Is it likely that some people are in prison longer by way of not meeting their parole conditions because they can't access a residential treatment program?
That would apply. That would apply to some people. So some people who have completed all their sentence plan may well find that they're struggling to find a place.
In some cases, prisons may be, in a sense, a holding pen for people who need drug and alcohol treatment. Well,
they always have been, and there has been a big increase in places for people in prison, drug treatment programs, for example. So I think the inquiry should be celebrated. I just hope that, out of it comes some really good planning so that we don't end up in this situation again.
That is Claire Aiken, Program Director at Moana House in Dunedin, a residential care facility for adult male offenders, many of whom have a history of alcohol and drug abuse. Joining us now live is Health Minister David Clark. We began the program with you tonight, Minister, announcing the personnel on the inquiry. It will continue till October. There is a real sense, though, that people need funding, and they need it now.
Yeah, John, thanks for having me on the program. It is a deeply personal issue for so many of us. We all know somebody who's had a mental health issue in our family or in our wider friend group, and many people know that the prison muster has grown enormously, and a huge number of those people have mental health and addiction issues. I've visited actually Moana House, where Claire is so valuably engaged, and they do an extraordinary job. The sad thing is that our addiction services have been run down, and our mental health services, you can't switch them on overnight, but you can build them up again. We've said that the health system generally has been underfunded for a very long period of time, and we have given a strong signal that we're going to invest $8 billion over the next 4 years to build up the health system again. So some of that money will come through the budget, and DHBs will have more money to spend on services that will assist those people struggling with mental health and addictions very soon.
So we heard Claire Aiken use the word celebration, I think, and Carl McDonald, who of course you know, is talking about feeling very emotional today because the inquiry has been announced. And look, you would have been racing around. It was a very busy time for you, but we had lots of reaction after 5 o'clock. But basically, without exception, except the LGBTI community, I think feels that they lack. Well, I don't think they feel. They explicitly said they lack representation on the board. But other than that response, everyone is saying this is fantastic. But we had Roger Brooking, we had Sean Robinson saying, look, the talk is great and the opportunity to talk is great, but what we all need now is more money.
Yes, John, look, that's why the government campaigned on a pledge of putting more money into the system. We know that there are things that immediately will make a difference for people struggling with mental health, like lowering the cost of visits to a GP, and one of our central pledges in the health area was to lower the cost of a visit to a GP by $10 for everybody. And so for teenagers, for example, and who are in the very low cost access scheme, their fee will go down from $12 to $2 for a visit. That really gets over one of the big barriers for people, because we know 500,000 people last year couldn't afford to go to a GP. That's by reporting in the health survey. And that's not acceptable. So we need to be making sure that people can access the services when they need them, and that's something that this government is determined to address. We're not going to sit on our laurels and not do things that could be done now. Another thing we've pledged to do is put a nurse in every public secondary school in the country, and nurses have mental health training, and we expect them to be dealing with mental health issues among our young people, and that is shown to work in the schools that already have that up and running. So there are things we know that have evidence behind them that we're going to get on with as a government. I am, really pleased that we've been able to announce this within our first 100 days of government. We have done a huge amount in our first 100 days, and obviously getting this inquiry up and running, getting a substantial panel on the inquiry with Māori Pacifica representation, consumer representation, youth and so on, has been critical, because we want to make sure that this inquiry makes really strong recommendations.
Absolutely.
That are challenging all of us in the community and across government.
And the recommendations, if they are strong, have to be implemented, don't they? In other words, what we're going to get, and I'm not being glib about this because there is not a person in the sector who won't be grateful for the opportunity to have their say. And Natasha Sadler, who I think you will remember us interviewing last year, whose son Memphis died while waiting for drug treatment, she was desperate for some kind of care, so everyone wants it. But come the recommendations, the checkbook has to come out, doesn't it? And it has to come out given our suicide rate, given the crisis of care, given the waiting lists, given 148 people waiting to get into Moana, some of whom will have to wait years and will do so in prison. It has to come out meaningfully in targeted ways and fast.
Yeah, that seems very logical, John. There are two schools of thought. One is that the money we've got now currently isn't always invested in the best places. Another is the very real recognition that in 2006-07 there were 100,000 people in New Zealand accessing mental health and addiction services. Now, a decade on, the latest statistic we have is that that's now over 170,000. It's 71% increase in the number of people accessing mental health and addiction services, and yet funding has only gone up by around half of that. So, there is no doubt that they're running on an oily rag, but we need to make sure that we're investing in the best possible way. Where we've got the evidence, we're going to get on with it, lowering barriers to access to primary care, which I've talked about already, nurses in schools. Where the evidence is there, we'll get on with it. Where the programs are successful, we expect that through the next budget round, when we put more money into health, that will be going to programs with good evidence behind them so that they can slowly begin the challenging journey of scaling up when so many people have left the mental health sector. And, we're determined to do something about this. This is a government that cares, and that's why we have prioritised mental health. It is something the public cares about, and it's something this government cares about and is determined to deliver on.
Health Minister David Clark joining us live on the phone there. We've heard lots about mental health and the system in crisis, according to many of those inside it on the program tonight, and we are receiving a great deal of feedback. If you have had experience of the mental health system at a care level, we would really love to hear from you. Do text us 2101. Thank you to the Minister and everyone who has been involved in our coverage tonight. A self-described whistleblower is vowing to fight a court order which could force the sale of her Auckland home to cover more than 10 years of unpaid rates. Penny Bright owes more than $30,000 in rates but is refusing to pay up because she says Auckland Council lacks transparency. Our reporter, Nita Blake-Person, went to find Ms Bright today.
When we visited Penny Bright at her Kingsland home this morning, her rubbish and recycling bins were out on the curb, ready for collection. The council waste collection service is one of several that Ms Bright has been accessing for the past 10 years, but refuses to pay for.
Yes, I do go to the library. I would prefer not to go down this line of argument. I would like to see a little bit more effort focused on why is the council not complying with the rule of law.
Ms Bright says she's taken every possible step to try to get action over what she says is a lack of council transparency.
For the last 10 years, the books have not been open regarding full and accurate records of contracts with private sector consultants and contractors, and that is in breach of the New Zealand Public Records Act 2005 Section 17, which has been the law for over 12 years.
In January 2016, the District Court ordered Ms Bright pay Auckland Council more than $34,000 in outstanding rates and penalties. After an unsuccessful appeal, the council was awarded total costs of more than $20,000. The council now wants to force the sale of Ms Bright's inner city home to recover the costs, but she is adamant that won't happen.
If anyone thinks it's fun putting your freehold home on the line, I can tell you it is not. And this is the third time I've been through this exercise, and what gets me is that Auckland Council is the biggest council in Australasia, and I've effectively been having a one-woman rates revolt against the biggest council in Australasia, because my simple way of putting it is, if you're not going to tell me exactly where my rates monies are being spent, I'm not giving you rates monies.
But Auckland Councillor Dick Quack says he doesn't think there is a lack of transparency through the council, and Ms Bright should pay her rates like every other Aucklander.
You have the right to protest, but there are consequences for that. And clearly the consequences of her not paying her rates is the fact that she's looking at the possibility of losing her house, and that's very sad.
Ms Bright says she bought her home for $145,000 in 1990, and it's now worth $1,040,000. The council's acting Chief Financial Officer Matthew Walker said taking action to recover rates was a last resort. If the sale does go ahead, the remainder of the proceeds from the sale would be released to Ms Bright through the public trust. Ms Bright says she is willing to meet with Auckland Council to reach an agreement, but her stance toward it opening its books won't change. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Nita Blake-Person aho.
Let's head from Auckland to the deep Old South with the time at 23:30 The aluminium smelter at Tiwai Point was severely threatened overnight by a large scrum fire which burned to within a few hundred metres. The 130-hectare blaze is still burning, but was contained this morning by 11 crews of firefighters and helicopters who flew all night and is being closely watched in case of flare-ups. The fire did burn through valuable conservation land but was stopped from entering the internationally recognised and rather wonderful Awarua wetlands. The smelter single-handedly uses more than an eighth of the power in the national grid. The smelter's general manager, Greta Stevens, told our reporter Ian Telfer she had a long and a worrying night.
I became the most nervous as I drove over the causeway and I guess saw the plumes of smoke which were illuminated by flame, and that was a pretty scary sight.
Now, how close did it get to the smelter in the end?
To our boundary fence, not that close. The Rural Fire Service did a great job of containing it from jumping over a nearby road, so probably about 400 metres or so from our boundary fence. Having said that, I haven't been up in a helicopter to have a look. One of our people has this morning.
But that's pretty close for you, isn't it?
Yes, it is, but our primary concern from a plant point of view was actually our power pylons, and it came within about 50 metres of some of those.
And why is that a concern?
Because our plant depends on a continuous supply of electricity, and obviously if the pylons are threatened, there's a risk that we may need to turn the power off.
And if that happened, would that just stop production, or would it cause lasting problems?
We have a window of a few hours of power interruption that we can withstand, but if we go beyond that, then we have a major production impact where essentially the smelter comes to a halt and we have to restart it.
Right, and do you get problems with pot lines freezing up, that kind of thing?
Exactly, that's what would happen if we had a long-term power interruption.
Has that ever happened?
We have never had a full smelter stoppage. We have had individual potline stoppages in the past when we've had faults with power supply equipment.
But that would have been difficult, expensive.
Oh, very much so, yes.
The fire service said that it's contained. Is it pretty much out?
It's contained. There are still some areas which are burning and still hot spots, so they need to keep working on it.
Is there still a threat?
No, we're not feeling under threat anymore.
How did it start?
It's too early to say the cause. The area is still under control of the Rural Fire Service at the moment.
But could it have been a smelter operation in some way?
No, it started many, many hundreds of metres away from the smelter.
So you don't believe that it would be caused by the smelter?
No.
So then it's a question of what else happened, is it? Power lines or some other thing?
Yes.
Have you ever seen anything like this before?
Not a fire close to a smelter. Previously, in my career, I have been at a smelter that has had a full blackout as a consequence of bushfires. This was in Australia, but those bushfires were many hundreds of kilometres away, but they did take out the power lines. And
for Tiwai, has there ever been a threat like this?
Yes, we have had fires on the peninsula before, but they've never come as close to the smelter as this one.
That was the head of the Tiwai smelter, Greta Stevens, talking to our Otago Southern reporter Ian Telfer, 27 minutes past 6. Just before we move on, a most excellent piece of feedback from Vida Klein in West Melton, Vida, which is in Selwyn, of course, Canterbury. There's only one effective way to deal with freedom camping: put Wilson Parking in charge of it. Problem solved. Vida, I did not know Wilson Parking had made it to West Melton. I thought you might be mercifully spared their predations. But yes, excellent point, and thank you. Thank you for your feedback tonight. Lots of it coming in. And those of you who've contacted us about the mental health system from the inside, we will be getting in touch with you. Finally tonight, if you've ever strolled down Hollywood's Walk of Fame, you will have no doubt seen some very big names. Hundreds of actors, stars and celebrities have been honoured with a star. The latest recipient is a 90-year-old who certainly doesn't look her age, as the BBC's Tim Allman reports.
For Minnie Mouse, it was most certainly a case of better late than never.
Oh, it's beautiful! Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
90 years after making her film debut and 40 years after Mickey was given his own star, Minnie got her moment in the spotlight.
You're an icon, an inspiration, and the best leading lady in the business. And after 90 years in showbiz, it's certainly about time you got your star.
Also there to celebrate Minnie's special day, Mickey, of course, and pop star Katy Perry, dressed in matching polka dots. She paid tribute to America's sweetheart.
Seeing Minnie is like returning home. It is a special skill to bring joy to so many, and she does it with an effortless bat of a lash, don't you, girl?
There were plenty of fans in attendance, some of them pointing out that this was a moment of female empowerment.
I'm finally glad that she finally got it. You know, it took her so many years, but she's definitely shown all of her hard work throughout the years. It's a slow progress, but we're getting there to get equality in Hollywood. And it starts with Minnie, I guess.
So, Minnie Mouse, film star, entertainer, and feminist icon.
That's the BBC's Tim Allman. We're going to end tonight with some feedback from a parent. My 14-year-old was on the adolescent mental health waiting list for a year. It was so full. A year. At 14 she couldn't go to school, and at 18 is so behind she can't easily get into tertiary education. She also can't work because of her condition. It's horrible. No help at a critical point in her life. For all of you sharing your stories with us, thank you. That is Checkpoint for this evening on behalf of our team. Very hard-working and excellent team. Thank you for being with us. And we will be back tomorrow night at 6. And if you'd like me to hum the sting, here it is. Say, everybody. That's the show. Back tomorrow night at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Health Minister says funding for mental health may be increased following a ministerial inquiry that will hear public submissions around the country. The Christchurch City Council will this week discuss adding chlorine to its water supply after it was revealed some wells may be susceptible to contamination. The Commerce Commission has laid 59 charges against a steel manufacturer, Euro Corporation, for making false and misleading claims about its steel mesh. And firefighters have found what appear to be human remains in a house truck that burned to the ground at Lake Hawea this morning. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Reindeers are better than people.
Broadway star Jonathan Groff, aka Kristoff from Frozen, is answering your questions. Send your questions with your name and age to upbeat@radionz.co.nz or upload your question on our Vox Pop app by Monday, January